Okay, hi there, everyone. Welcome back. So, I hope you all had a wonderful Easter. We're not going to be posting this much in terms of a new assignment this week, just because of the fact that it is technically your week off. But I still want to get back to you guys, touch in for those that are checking in. I did get a question coming up, and I think is very important one to address, and it's one that many people do experience. So, I'm going to jump right into it with you guys. Why did God kill the firstborn child and punish innocent families who didn't have sheep or goat's blood on their front door during the Passover? It just doesn't make sense. Why poor little children and animals are being killed, even in families who may not even have access to a sheep or a goat? If you have any idea why God did what he did, please let me know and help me understand. So I'm going to get into this. I'm going to get into it in a couple different ways as well. So I'm going to try to type in my stuff a little bit, give you a little bit of an outline to guide you where I am going with this. So if you can follow along a little bit with that visual assistance there. But I'm going to break it down into a few different questions. First off, I'm going to address one that's very basic because even though this is a very straightforward question, that is one that a lot of people have, and it's a very understandable question. It's super complicated and super in-depth because there's a lot of different elements to it. So I'm going to start off with the basic one, and I'm going to address the privilege is what we're simply going to call it. It would help if Mr. Mrazek was typing properly on here. It'd look a lot better, eh? So we're going to talk about the privilege specifically of having access to that sheep or the goat. And what we have to look at then is a very fundamental Christian teaching. That is one of community. When you look at having a community, people trust each other. They turn to each other. What you see here is in this instance, you have these individuals that are in need, and they are all experiencing the same call right now. They've all been informed. They all know to do this. So it's not as much of a matter of would they have had access to it. If they didn't, ask a neighbor. Someone would help them because that's the entire calling. These are the people who have faith and trust in God. Well, if you're trusting in God, that means you have to follow his word as well. And God's word is to help your neighbor, is to care for one another, is to help each other when they are in need. And so when you see that, you have to have faith and trust in your community. But in addition to that, you also need to reach out. It's a very important thing. You must reach out when you need help. If you don't reach out, people don't know that you need the help. Um, I think to a New Testament teaching here when we're looking at this, the idea of reaching out. Blessed are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted. Yes, one of our lovely beatitudes here. And so when you look at that, the message that's coming across is you need to open up, you need to release, you need to let people know when you need help if you want them to help you. And so that's what we're seeing here is those individuals would simply have had to have reached out for that help. So I hope that addresses the part on privilege. Next up though, let me even bring this down so we can get rid of it here. We're going to look at the actual killing of the firstborn child and the protection of the innocent. So let's start off here. We're going to put protection of the innocent. So why are they being protected? What is so special about these individuals that's allowing them to be saved from it? Once again, some very fundamental Catholic and Christian and Jewish teachings that are being presented here. Ones of faith, undying faith in God, and trust in God. So you have faith and you trust in God. You have faith that everything's going to be right, and you trust in the actions that are going to get us there. What you are doing is you are physically enacting that faith and that trust. You are showing that, okay, I was told to do this. It might not make sense. I'm going to look at this. They are people. They were people just like we are right now. If someone came up to you and said, put some cow's blood on your door to save your firstborn son or firstborn child, you're probably going to be a little bit hesitant about it. I know I would be. And that's where faith comes in. Sometimes faith and trust, it's not easy. It's not easy to trust people. You think of the activities like trust falls. In our class, we watched Hoovie, and there's the idea that real trust isn't trusting that the person can walk with the wheelbarrow. It's getting into the wheelbarrow with them. That's where the trust is. You actually have to take a leap. You have to put yourself out there to let that happen. And so that's why they're being protected, because they're showing that. God's call is for people to trust him, to love him, and to listen to him. Remember that this is a world of sin. So these are people that are showing a commitment through their trust and faith. They're showing, I want to commit myself to God and to God's calling. So that's that idea of the protection of the innocent. So that's the idea of the protection of the innocent. Sorry, my mic cut out there. I'll be going through this as best as I can with you guys still, though. We're going to move into the last one then. The actual, why did God kill? That's the very most basic question. The most basic question. We can have a sub question out of there, specifically the firstborn. This is more symbolic. Um, the firstborn child historically carries a lot of significance with them in many cultures, especially Western cultures, Western Europe, and now the Americas. What you see is an importance on the firstborn, where they would actually inherit all the land, the wealth, the family name, all of those kinds of things. And so the idea of the firstborn is very symbolic. You see these examples all through the Bible. You see it right early on. Um, when we come to the idea, when the stories of Cain and Abel, we see with Abraham having to sacrifice his firstborn. We see all of these firstborn sons, and we see the drama that ensues throughout it in the Bible. And it continues on all the way up into the New Testament, where we still see that idea of the firstborn son. It is very much a symbolic representation, based on a lot on culture throughout history. Whereas, yeah, our culture bases a large significance on the firstborn. So you see that even with the idea that God sacrifices his firstborn son to all of us, Jesus Christ. Abraham's willing to sacrifice his firstborn. It's all the idea of that firstborn being super, super important. So that's why it specifically references the firstborn. But as for the God, why does God kill? This isn't meant to be about the idea of murder. Remember, God is not human. God does not act as humans act. God must be perfect in everything he does at all times. Remember, I used the word he generically. God is beyond gender. God, that the idea of the Father, that's a metaphorical and symbolic representation. And so when you look at this, though, God is perfect in everything. So just as God is perfect in his love of us and his forgiveness of us, he is also perfect in his condemnation of those who live a life of unrepentant sin. So, what is unrepentant sin? Unrepentant sin is not living a life without sin. It's living a life where you sin and you don't want to do better, where you're not willing to accept God's call into your life. It doesn't even mean that you will do better when you are repentant, it just means you want to do better. Unrepentant individuals are the ones who do not change. So when we look at this specific story, the one of the Passover, what you are seeing here is an example of where you have a choice. Do we follow God and God's calling for us, where he asks us to show faith and show love in him, and just by sacrificing this goat and putting it on the door? Or do we deny God and continue our life of, when you look at the Pharaoh and the peoples of imprisonment, not in our modern sense. Remember, slavery back then was a little bit different than we understand it in our modern times. But these brutalities and these lives of sin, these are individuals who Moses came to them. Moses came to the Pharaoh and he said, look, you guys suck right now. Like, let us go. God's asking you, you stop sucking so much and we'll get through this. And they're like, well, no. We don't believe you. We don't have faith. We don't trust in God. And so what you end up seeing then is these people are punished, just as God states. Those who commit sins will be punished in this life and in the next. This is just an immediate example of it, on a larger scale. And you do see other examples with Sodom and Gomorrah, um, all throughout it. Forgiveness is presented to people all throughout the Bible. It's our calling, though, of whether we accept it or not. Is this an extreme example with death, just like I mentioned Sodom and Gomorrah before? Yeah, Death is a very extreme example. And you have to remember the time that they lived in, because I say everything is contextual. These are people who they had a sense of identity, but they didn't have a sense of place, of belonging in this world. They didn't get to maintain their own identity. And so that's where you see the difficulty coming through with this, as opposed to our more modern interpretation through the New Testament, where we focus more on the love and forgiveness. But that's a very separate context of the time. Both the New Testament and Old Testament have a vengeful God and a forgiving God. God is both, because God is all of that and more. God is perfection. And so I really hope this answers the question. If it does not, shoot me another email, shoot me a follow up. I actually really enjoy doing this. This is fun. I know I don't get our question periods anymore, so I hope this answers it. So to kind of specify what um, we talked about here, as I said here and typed it there. So what you do end up having is addressing the idea of privilege. So a community, you could have trusted in the community, reach out to them, all of that. Why are these poor animals suffering? Once again, context. It is an idea of sacrifice. These animals are proving a purpose, and in those times, those were food, that was livelihood. It's actually that very point, I should have addressed this, that it's that very point that yes, not many people would have had this. So you are sacrificing your food, your life, your well-being to show this devotion of faith. Now they would also feast on these things during Passover time. It's actually a feast time as well, so don't forget, it's not like these animals are going to waste. What we're seeing then is the protection of the innocent. That's a demonstration of faith and trust, always having faith in God, always trusting in God, knowing that God is the ideal, God is perfect. Even if we don't always understand what God wants for us, we have to have faith. And then finally, why did God kill? So specifically, the idea of the firstborn was a very symbolic one. So the idea of murder, it's not murder. God wasn't murdering them. This was an idea of that, once again, that sacrifice, that punishment, but this punishment was taking place here on this earth. They had that interaction directly with a prophet. We don't have that privilege in our lives. They met the prophet, and God was being perfect in his decision making, in his killing of the firstborns in that sense. So I do hope this addresses it. The big thing, once again, comes down to, we have to remember the fundamental truths that are being presented through this story, because historically people did not speak how we speak today. They spoke metaphorically, symbolically, so the messages could be passed down. So what is this story telling us? This story is telling us that we must have faith in God. We must always have faith in God and trust in God. And we must help one another, help our neighbors, be there for them. Will it be easy? No. But the alternative to not having faith in God, not having trust in God, is a lot worse. It's our souls, our eternal damnation, and our lives here on this earth. So I hope this helped you. I hope this answered the question. Once again, keep those questions coming. This was awesome. Have yourselves a wonderful day, and we'll stay in touch.